course, all the photographers will be involved. And I was delighted you were coming early this morning. If we'd set this up for this afternoon, we'd been try actually go to a studio that a film ever gets finished. I really do. Are you on a two-shot now? Yeah. Yeah, okay. We'll just talk a little bit for the two-shot. But don't you...
Oh, it is a marvel.
Yeah.
Never mind getting them made well, getting them made.
Exactly.
It costs too much now.
That's right. Okay. You're on close-up now, huh? All right. Well, Chuck, first of all, welcome back to Texas. It's always just a delightful day when we can see you.
Well, thank you, Bobbie. It's always a pleasure to have the loan of your audience for a while.
The Mountain Men is a story written by your son, Frasier Heston. And I know that Frasier has been writing for some time, but this really is the first thing of any prominence that he's had, isn't it?
This is, he's sold 2 other screenplays, but this is the first one to reach the screen in the classic phrase. And I was aware that he was writing it, and but he was very careful to keep kind of an arm's length relationship, which I understand, until he and his partners, Martin Schaefer and Andy Scheinman, had sold it to Columbia. And then they submitted it to me, and I looked forward to reading it with some trepidation. I thought, what if I don't like it? But I think he's written me one of the best parts I've had in years, and a part with more comedy in it than I usually get. I'm usually leading the Israelites out of bondage, or painting the Sistine ceiling, or getting elected president. And as we see this week, that's very sober work. There are not many laughs in that.
I wonder, though, how a young man like Frasier got interested in this subject, because actually this part of Indian life and pioneer life isn't very well known.
No, that's quite true. The era of the fur traders in the American Rockies just lasted less than a generation. And they were very different men, both from the explorers, Lewis and Clark, the Spanish conquistadores that opened up the continent a generation before them, and even more different from the empire builders, the settlers and cattle men that came half a century later, 50 years after that. And in a sense, I think they weren't heroes like the explorers. They weren't interested in opening up the new lands. And it's wrong to perceive of them as these flamboyant, brawling characters who strode over the Rockies, throttling a grizzly with one hand and brushing Blackfeet braves aside with the other. What they really wanted more than anything else, Frey says the Mountain Men is about not giving up. I think it's about wanting to have elbow room. That's something all of us can understand now. We live more and more, we were talking a minute ago, in a society where you can't even drive down the street you're used to driving down because they've just made it one way. And the apartment building you wanted to move into won't take dogs, or sometimes won't take children. And we all spend more time than we want to think about, standing in line to get this renewed, or to get a permit to put an outhouse in down in the farm. And the supermarket prices go up, and you have to stand in line there too. And the fur trappers, the free trappers, were willing to give up to escape that kind of restriction more than any of us would, I think. They gave up any kind of security, any kind of warm human relationship. They lived a desperately marginal existence, mostly by themselves, entirely by themselves. That's why they were so good at what they did. Bernard DeVoto in Across the Wide Missouri says that the trappers, the fur trappers, were superb at surviving because they had to do it by themselves. They were better shots than the Indians, and better trackers than the Indians, and better trappers, and in better shape, and could run faster because they had to do an awful lot of it. But there's a line in The Mountain Men where Brian Keith, who I think is marvelous in the part, the chemistry between us is delightful, I think, and very sparks come off. And he's talking to me, and he's lamenting the end of the rendezvous, and that the fur companies are paying too low prices for the beaver pelts, and the beaver are low, and the whole thing seems to be turning sour, as indeed it was. The period was coming to an end. And I say, well, you remember when we first come out here, and man could walk for a year in any direction with just his rifle, never say sir to nobody. I call that free. And that's what the picture's about to me. It's a marvelous period to explore, and as you suggested, one that has hardly been on the screen at all. You could say Jeremiah Johnson was, which was a picture I liked very much, was about the same period, but that had nothing to do with the life, the way of life, really.
Chuck, this movie is going to give Frasier, your son, an identity, a real identity of his own. Has this been a difficult thing for him to achieve as Charlton Heston's son?
Well, of course, movie audiences already remember him at the age of 3 months as the infant Moses floating down the Nile in a basket in the Ten Commandments. But, of course, to examine the question seriously is a very fair consideration. I think a thing that's struck me about Frasier, since he was a little guy, and he's bigger than I am now, is he was a remarkably cool and easy and relaxed young man, even as a boy. Maybe it was that, whereas I have lived in the public eye for now most of my life, he was born to it. And earlier than he can remember, he was on movie locations. And maybe that's, although he set out determined first to be a marine biologist, and then when he got into creative writing, the first writing he sold was not movie scripts. He sold some short pieces to magazines, things like that. But I think a lot of the making of movies was in his blood, and I think a lot of what you were asking me about, his adjustment to living in public, was something that came easily to him because he was born in it.
Does it come as easily to your daughter, Holly?
I think both Frasier and Holly have had the advantage of having to deal with it all their lives, and they both, I think, respond very well in public, and at the same time, both understand enormously well the value of having a private profile as well.
In talking with children of famous parents, Chuck, the thing that most of them say very early on in the conversation is that they feel such a responsibility and such a pressure not to do anything that would reflect on the famous parent.
Well, I've never heard either Frasier or Holly say that. Perhaps it's maybe something they just understood, or don't feel any particular urge to break the traces anyway. I think the most important thing you can do for a child, a son or daughter, as a parent, is to know how much of yourself, your time, which is the most valuable thing you can give a child after your love, how much of your time you must give them when they are young, and how you must learn to open your hands as they grow. And of the two, I found the second part the hardest part, but it's a source of great pride for me to see Frasier now and know that he is his own man, and that he's got his feet under him and has found a path to climb.
I don't think it's likely to happen, Chuck, and I say that sincerely. But let's say that there, and we know that this does happen, let's say that there are a few rather well-known critics or reviewers who give it a bad review and criticize it where it reflects directly on Frasier. How will he cope with that, and how will you, as his father, cope with that?
Well, I think, again, obviously, every artist in any of the arts gets bad notices. Frasier will have to deal with it the way we all deal with disappointments. And I think he can. I think there again, he was exposed to, I've had my share of bad notices. And I remember, and Frasier's heard me tell this story, and it perhaps will serve him well too. I did a play a number of years ago with Laurence Olivier, who of course is, I think, obviously the greatest actor alive and a man of enormous stature in and out of acting. And this play was a terrible flop, and we got, and very likely even deserved, very bad notices. And we were sitting up very late over a bottle of brandy the night the play closed, and I was very young and green at the time. And finally I said, well, Larry, I guess you just learned to dismiss the bad notices. He put his hand on my arm and he said, Chuck, well, it's much more important and much harder. You have to learn to dismiss the good ones.
Yes. Wise words. Wise words. But still, when it's a father-son relationship, won't the pain be a little more?
I don't think so. I mean, you mean, will I be more distressed
maybe
at
more
his
than
bad
Frey
notices than I would another writer that I work with? I suppose I would, of course. That's inevitable. But he's durable. He's very durable.
And you're durable, both as a person and as an actor. Chuck, it is truly, I close the way I started. It's just delightful to see you again.
Well, Bobbie, I wouldn't want to come to Fort Worth without sitting down across a microphone with you. It's been fine, as always. Look forward to next time.
Thank you so much.
The success of an interview is largely in the hands of the interviewer rather than the interviewee.
It's like your business, Chuck. You know, if you don't get, I've been doing this 20 years, if you don't get good, you get out.
Yeah, right. That's right, sure.
No,
actually come into combat.
Well, you see the planes taking off, but no, not
it'd be very
not
difficult
really.
to do.
Yeah.
Because
and you see some zeros up there flying around, but
because there's no. I know when we made Midway, that was makeable only because both the Japanese and the American Navy in World War II shot their combat footage in color. Because you can't shoot that stuff again.
I know,
impossible.
I remember.
Impossible to shoot. And I suppose they would be faced with, if they're going to show combat with World War II aircraft, and World War II aircraft and modern aircraft, how are you going to do that?
That's right. You can give me about 15 or 20 each. No shadows or anything? Looking okay? All right. Well, Chuck, you have to be very proud that The Mountain Men was written by your son, Frasier. And I'm going to start again. Okay. Chuck, you have to be very proud that The Mountain Men was written by your son, Frasier. I know that he has written other things, but is this the first thing of any prominence that he's written? This movie will give Frasier an identity of his own. Was this a difficult thing for him to achieve as the son of Charlton Heston? Do you think your children have ever resented your fame? Have your children ever resented your fame? Yeah, they're in Mike McGrew's office.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which one is that?
Right down here on the right.
Okay.
You're still rolling? Yeah, okay. Chuck, every time I have talked with children of famous parents, the one common thing that they seem to say is that they've always been so aware that anything they might do would reflect on their parents, particularly anything of a negative nature. Have your children had to fight that battle? Chuck, every time I have talked with children of famous parents, almost always they say that there's been a pressure on them not to do anything that would reflect in a bad way on their parents. Have your children felt that pressure? What about your daughter, Holly? Has it been more difficult for her? Did you have any strong feelings one way or the other about Frasier going into the motion picture business? If it should happen that The Mountain Men gets some bad reviews, and particularly reviews that reflect on Frasier's writing, how will you handle that? But won't it be more difficult for you as the father? Thank you, Chuck, very much. Bye-bye. Now, I'll just give you some more reactions in case we might need them. That ought to do it.